clear. Well, again, welcome everyone. My name is Todd Paul, and I'm with LDC, which is the consulting firm, land use engineering consulting firm in Woodinville. We're just down the road from you, about 15-20 minutes. My colleague Sammy Adams is here on the call as well. She will be taking notes for us today, and then at the conclusion of the meeting, within a day or so, we'll have the summary of the meeting that we talked about today. We'll provide that to Nita, and then she can distribute that to everyone here. So just first wanted to introduce everybody. So a part of our meeting here, we've got, of course, myself, and then we have Director Ben Swanson and Senior Planner Anita Marrero. And just wanted to give an opportunity for either Ben or Anita to kind of just provide a very brief intro or hello or whatever you'd like to say before we get started here.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and I can do that. My name is Anita Marrero, and I'm a senior planner at the City of Monroe. And I've been at the city for about 3.5 years now. And so I'm excited to start this project. This is actually the first time that we've done a housing action plan. So yeah, just excited to get everyone's input. And I just wanted to let you know that anytime you have questions throughout this process, feel free to email me or give me a call. Yeah, I want to make sure that at any point you have that option. So, and then I'll just let Ben introduce himself.
I think you're on mute, Ben.
Just notified me, thank you. So I'm Ben Swanson, I'm the Community Development Director here. I probably won't have a lot to say. Both Anita and Todd have been doing a great job with this project, and so it's basically they got ownership of it. So I'm just here to listen.
Okay, so at this time we'd like to kind of do a roundtable and have everybody that's part of the stakeholder committee meeting introduce themselves and your either your organizational affiliation or how long you've lived in Monroe, and maybe a little bit about why you're interested in the project. And yeah, we just like to hear from everybody.
If you would, I'll start off. My name is Tony Pork. I moved to Monroe with my wife and family in 1995, August 1st. And I'm retired. I've worked for the school district for several years as a paraeducator. I'm on the board of Housing Hope, Snohomish County. I'm also the president of the East County chapter of Housing Hope. I was the founder of it and the first president. And I've been involved in affordable housing since the 70s. So also a key leader in the development of the Tacoma Home Ownership Development Center that provides home ownership opportunities for low-income families. And for the last 45 years, I have had a passion for affordable housing.
Okay, I will go next. My name is Janelle Lewis. I am a newbie to Monroe. I have only lived here since, oh wait, am I unmuted? Yeah, there we go. Okay. I've only lived here since April of 2018. We come from California, have quite a large family. We have 8 children. I am the office manager at Maltby Elementary. And I'm very interested in serving on this committee because I know that when we moved here, it was difficult for us to find a place. And I know that in communication with a lot of families here in Monroe, affordable housing is definitely like a big issue. So I love helping people. So when the opportunity presented itself, I said I would love to be a part of it.
Want to speak next?
I'll go next. My name is Rachel Adams, and I am the City of Monroe's project management consultant that is working on the Homeless Policy Advisory Committee recommendations, implementing those. I'm also a member of the Community Human Services Advisory Board, and I've lived in Monroe since 2004. When we moved out to Monroe, this was the only place that we could afford, and it was quite an adjustment from the east side. And we managed to get our house secured right before everything started going up. And I feel like we did that again when we moved 5 houses down the same street because we love Monroe so much that I just couldn't bear to actually leave. So we just popped a couple houses down, and you know, prices just astound me right now. So being on both the boards, I'm really interested in the parallel track of how to create more affordable housing and transitional housing options for folks.
Great. Welcome. Thank you.
And I'll go next. I'm Petra Dungan, and I've lived in Monroe since about 2001. I relocated from New York, and originally I lived in Sammamish, and my husband and I decided to move to Monroe. And one of the reasons why we did was we live up in the farm, and we live in a quadrant home. And when we bought this house, we looked at other quadrant communities, and the same house was, you know, $50,000 to $100,000 more than it was in Monroe. So my husband had previously lived in Monroe, so we decided to come here. I also currently, right now, I'm on the board of the YMCA in Monroe, and I'm also on the Kiwanis board. And just the housing prices and opportunity for housing does astound me. So that's why I'm interested in this committee as well.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go next. I think I'm last. Am I, Anita?
Yes, yeah.
So my name is Jay Bull. My wife and I moved to Monroe in 1987, raised 2 kids through the public school system. I've been in banking, community banking, since 1986. Familiar with the organization that Tony talked about, Housing Hope. I worked with Fred Safstrom at Cascade Bank when he was president there, and he is currently the chairman of the board of the bank I work for now. So we do whatever we can, our bank does whatever we can to support Housing Hope. And as a community bank, that's one of the things we focus on, is trying to give back to our communities. I'm also currently on the Monroe Planning Commission. So hoping to have some advocacy for affordable housing there as well, but that should do it. I'm particularly interested in this because my kids are growing and out of the house, and I think it would be hard for them to afford a house in Monroe. And you know, based on the apartment data that I get through work, it's even, you know, not that easy to afford an apartment for young professionals. And so that's, you know, that's my focus. I'm trying to make affordability across all spectrums of the housing in Monroe.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your introductions, and I'm really looking forward to our group discussion here a little bit later. Anita and I work together on formulating some topics of discussion that we'll do in the second part of our meeting. The first part will be primarily me providing some background information about why the city is doing the project, as well as kind of the basis for the housing needs and housing action plan and housing needs assessment, because as you all mentioned and know, there's a tremendous challenge that we all face here in the Puget Sound region, and actually statewide and region-wide, not just Washington, but Oregon as well. But obviously we're focused on the situation at hand, which is within our own particular Western Washington region, and in this case, the city of Monroe. we're actually helping out a number of other jurisdictions as well, just like Monroe. And so this isn't new to us, but we're really excited to be able to help Monroe, not only in the fact that we've worked with a number of the staff members before in some capacity, but also because we're neighbors too. We're in Woodinville, and I myself live in the Woodinville community, and we're all facing this challenge together. So we're really looking forward to continuing to work for the course of this project. And so I appreciate you guys all taking the time, and your input is really going to be valuable to the city and to our team overall. So kind of moving on to our next part, just really briefly, I believe Anita sent you an email prior to this meeting with just a few documents that to take a look at, logistics of kind of how GoToMeeting work. The first part, I think you conquered, is you were all successful in accessing the software. I know most of us are pretty well versed now with COVID, in the COVID world that we live in. So whether it's Zoom, GoToMeeting, or any other platforms, most of us are pretty well versed. So I think you succeeded in that. If at any time you need to get up and turn off your video or anything like that, totally understandable. You're not going to offend myself or the city staff. So that's just kind of the reality of what we're using today. So don't feel like you're going to upset anybody here. In terms of the expectations, we're really looking forward for the members to kind of understand the process of why we're doing that, and then kind of what role that you all are taking in this. It's really kind of providing some advisory or really good feedback on what we're going to be talking about today, and the group discussion will hopefully bring that out. And so we're really looking forward to hearing your individual perspectives, your expertise, and the backgrounds that you come from. And that'll play a very important role as we help formulate the action items as we progress in this project. And then just providing those insights as we do review the housing needs assessment. And the housing needs assessment, just really quickly, it's really a data finding process, and we just actually completed the draft portion. And if staff hasn't provided that link to you yet, we can certainly do that today, and that draft is available on our project website. And I'll have a slide here that kind of shows a snapshot of that, and then we'll have that link to you. One of us will provide that, and then you can review that. But I'll have a couple of slides to kind of talk about, what some of the data means, because that's really going to speak a lot about how we really talk about that. So moving on to kind of what our agenda is going to be today, we're going to have a brief overview of the Housing Action Plan and the purpose and the goals and the objectives of what we're talking about. And then we'll kind of talk about, what the project schedule is on from when we initially started this project a couple months ago, 2-3 months ago with Anita and Ben, and then how it's going to progress until about the end of May or early June, once the council has the final plan to deliberate on and hopefully approve, and then that gets forwarded on to the state. And then kind of the role of your position here in the stakeholder committee, and then finally kind of looking at the needs assessment overview. And then we'll kind of take a short break so everybody can take a stretch break, and then we'll come back and then have a good group discussion with a number of items that we put together for you all. So kind of just wanted to kick off here and provide kind of what is the purpose of this housing action plan that we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, why is it that we're here? Why is the city here embarking on this project? So like I mentioned at the beginning, we're in a regional housing crisis. We're all facing challenges on, housing affordability, availability, any number of factors that are related to housing in our communities. And one of the ways that we're hopefully going to address that is through this 2019 the state legislature passed what's called the House Bill 1923 grant program. This will focus on an increase for residential building capacity. And with that grant program, there was $5 million allocated for jurisdictions, and the city of Monroe received a $50,000 grant from the Department of Commerce to create this housing needs assessment and housing action plan to address these ongoing housing issues that were affecting in the area. The initiative fits into the broader context of the GMA, which is the Growth Management Act, which some of you may or may not have heard. That's basically, there's a number, like 13 goals that we're all cities that are under the Growth Management Act have to abide by. And then we also have the comprehensive plan, which is basically the general plan or the guidebook of how the community is going to grow over the next 20 to 30 years. And that gets adopted periodically, about every 8 to 10 years. It kind of shifts back and forth lately, but I think generally about 8 years is when the cities and the counties update their comprehensive plans. And those have segments like land use, economic development, environment, all those different things. And one of the aspects of the comp plan, or one of the elements, is the housing element. So this project will help inform some of those goals and policies as well as the city moves on with that next update. And then finally, the city and the consultant team are emphasizing public and stakeholder engagement throughout the process. And we're doing that by a number of ways. That would be through an event like this or a group like this, the Stakeholder Committee. We've developed a website or project web page that is a little bit more interactive, hopefully, than the traditional one. The documents that are up on the project page are commentable, so you can review the documents that are produced and then provide comments in real time. So instead of emailing those things to staff and then they kind of just write a notebook down, you can put those comments right into the documents and they'll be shown in real time. And then a number of other things that are available on there, as well as important dates. And then the city is giving frequent updates too to the Planning Commission, City Council, and other groups too. So Anita's taking care of that on the city side. And moving on to the next slide. So kind of just a nutshell on the Growth Management Act. There was a tremendous amount of growth that occurred in the 1980s in this region, and cities and counties really lacked the tools at that time to control this growth. And so the state of Washington adopted what's called the Growth Management Act, or GMA for short, in 1990. And that basically requires fast-growing cities and counties to develop comprehensive plans, which I mentioned, to manage this growth. And under that, there's the 13 goals that act as the basis for all of the comp plans. And this next slide will show those goals. I won't go over all of them, but in generally speaking, most comprehensive plans will have all of these, or most of them. The most regular ones that you'll see are land use and housing, economic development, parks and recreation, environmental protection, things like that. And then there's some optional ones that cities or counties can choose to do as well. Historic preservation is one of them. You might have a city character, community character element. I came recently, last year, joined LDC and came from the city of Linwood, where I worked for 7 years as their planning manager, and we had something similar to that. And so it's kind of varies by jurisdiction depending on the desires of the community, but in general, there's going to be the core elements, which I mentioned previously, that each city or county is required to have. And then this map basically shows who is required to plan fully under the Growth Management Act. So those ones that are shown in green, those are the ones that are currently required. As you can tell, for the most part, most of them are going to be your urban ones or have some urban significance or a city that is larger. So in some of those eastern Washington ones, obviously Yakima County has the city of Yakima, Chelan County has Wenatchee, Leavenworth, so a number of cities over there. And then Clark County is Vancouver, which is growing tremendously because it's right next to Portland. And then you've got Spokane County, which is obviously our second largest city in the state in Spokane. So those ones that are in green fully plan under the GMA. And then the blue ones are those that have opted in. They aren't required to, but they've chosen to do that. And then those that are in gray currently do not plan under the GMA. But they may have a general plan or a comprehensive plan that they've chosen to kind of help guide the city or the community or the county as they move along. Feel free to jump in too if you guys have any questions. I know this is kind of a lot of information for some of you or all of you. So the Housing Action Plan, this is really kind of a snapshot of, you know, how does it really fit into the GMA itself? And so what you have is this general timeline that shows how when comprehensive plan updates fit into the process, which are your asterisks there on the bottom of the dates. And the most recent ones were in the 2015 to 16 range, so they vary kind of depending on the county. They'll have a deadline date at the Department of Commerce. They're the ones that operate the growth management requirements for the state of Washington. And those are the deadlines for those. And then you'll see PSRC Vision 2050. PSRC is Puget Sound Regional Council. They're a what you would call a multi-county planning agency, generally within the metropolitan region. So that would be King, Snohomish, Pierce, and Kitsap counties. They have a little bit of extra requirements as part of their county and city plans. And they also help distribute federal transportation funds through PSRC. And then you also have the buildable lands process. That is done at the county level. And that's information that helps cities and counties find out what properties or what parcels within particular communities are available for redevelopment or are prime for redevelopment. So there's factors that, kind of an algorithm of factors that determines how buildable or redevelopable parcels are based on, you know, different things like critical areas. It could be impacted by wetlands or streams or steep slopes or economic reasons. And so the counties every several years, I believe it's 5 to 6 years, they update those buildable lands reports, and then that helps feed into the comprehensive plan updates. And then in fact, it's actually going to help the city of Monroe and you know, this project a little bit later on, and they're not quite ready at Snohomish County, but we're looking forward to getting that information in the upcoming year. You also have what's called county-wide planning policies, essentially similar to local comp plans. They have their own goals and policies as required by the Growth Management Act, and then those are sort of the overarching ones that cities within the particular counties have to follow. And then lastly, that comp plan update process, the next one being in that 22 to 24 range. Anita, I don't recall exactly what your date was. I think it might be 24, if I don't, or that or 25 is when Monroe is due. But they have their mandated timelines. And then, of course, what we're talking about here today at the top is the housing needs assessment and then the housing action plan. And I'll talk a little bit about those as well. So I won't kind of belabor this one too much, but this basically shows you how the GMA and the housing requirements are operated. So at the top, you have that Growth Management Act and the housing requirements that are part of that overarching plan. And then you have the countywide planning policies, and in your case with Monroe, that's Snohomish County. And then you have the comprehensive plan housing element requirements. And these are all regulated by those RCWs that you see there, and their particular language attached to that, but I won't read that verbatim. If you have any desire to find that, you can find all the comprehensive plan documents and regulations in there. So the housing action plan purpose. So the housing action plan itself is kind of broken up into these two categories. So you, on the left, you see the housing needs assessment. That's what we do with that is we quantify existing and project housing needs for all income levels. We document the housing and household characteristics and cost burden households within the community. And then we analyze population trends that are happening. And then finally evaluate potential for success in achieving housing types and units. So it's kind of a data gathering exercise by pulling information from OFM or census or other groups that obtain this information. So our staff has been busy doing that over the last couple months, and working with Anita and the Monroe staff to get some data from them, and then we've produced this housing needs assessment document, or the draft document, which the city will review and provide comments on that. We'll further refine that if needed, and then we'll have that final HNA document that will then be utilized for the housing action plan. And then, of course, the housing action plan on the right there, this is to consider strategies to minimize displacement of low-income residents, develop strategies to increase the supply and the variety of housing, and then include a schedule of programs and actions to implement the recommendations of the HAP. So this will be the next stage of the process, and Anita and I will be collaborating on developing this plan with a number of potential actions that will hopefully address some of the challenges that have been discovered or obviously already known by many of you that we're facing in the Monroe community. So just to kind of compare, do a comparison. So the state law requirements for the HAPs is the requirement of an inventory and of an analysis of existing and projected housing needs that identifies the number of housing units necessary to manage projected growth, and then require adequate provisions for existing and projected needs for all economic segments of the community. So we're not focusing on just any particular group. It's a wide range of housing needs, whether that may be for young families. It could be for seniors or aging population. Obviously, the challenges are many across all segments, and so the state law is, or this particular program is looking to address those number of challenges that we're facing. And so the Housing Action Plan is to quantify existing and projected needs for all these income levels, and then documenting them and the characteristics and what cost burden households are facing in the community. And then lastly, analyzing population and employment trends. And then one more slide here on comparison. So state law requires identifying land for housing, including but not limited to government assistance housing, housing for low-income families, manufactured housing, and group homes and foster care facilities. And then policies that consider the need for affordable housing, such as housing for all economic segments that of the population, and parameters for the distribution of these. And then the Housing Action Plan considers strategies to minimize the displacement of low-income residents resulting from development, and then strategies to increase the supply and variety of housing types. And that's the goal, our primary goal for the Housing Action Plan. So kind of getting into where we're at in the project schedule, just really quickly to kind of show you a snapshot of where we're at or where we're headed. This little chart here kind of shows you the path of where we've started to where the completion ultimately is going to end up. So at the beginning, we had a project kickoff with Monroe staff. That was held months ago in the spring or early summer, and we created the Stakeholder Committee, or at least Anita and Ben did. She reached out to you all, and we're again thankful for your participation and input that you're going to be providing. We've been working hard on the housing needs assessment, and like I said, we've completed a draft document that will be, or is, up on the project website, and you'll be able to view and comment on that as well. Then we'll have a draft housing action plan that will be completed by the end of the year. That's our goal. Is Nita and I are going to be working together over the course of the fall, the next 4 months or so, and then we'll have that draft released for public review and input. And then the final housing action plan will be developed in the late spring, prior to the deadline, which is the end of June. But our goal obviously is to get that completed by the end of May, so that there's a little bit of time for the city to process things and get that distributed to the state to meet the grant requirements. So in terms of the stakeholder committee meetings, we're anticipating to have at least 2 of these meetings, one being today and then another one a little bit later on. We'll kind of see whether or not we want to hold a third one, but at least 2 times during the project, we're anticipating these. And obviously today is our kickoff meeting, and then we're reviewing the housing needs assessment kind of in a quick nutshell, and then the review of the draft housing action plan, which we'll do later after the beginning of the year. So our second meeting, we're anticipating probably to be in that middle to late part of the winter. So, you know, January, February-ish is when we're anticipating that, but that date may change a little bit. So this is the timeline that we put together with the documents, and these are viewable on our project website as well. So we kicked off in May and June, put together that public outreach information and the web page development. So Sammy and I and some other team members worked with Anita to refine and put together a really nice interactive web page that you're able to download documents, and you'll be able to comment and do things on. And then the housing needs assessment, the first red arrow there, obviously is where we're currently at in the process. We've completed that draft housing needs assessment, and then the housing action plan will be completed over the next few months through the end of the year. And then the final draft beginning in January. And then, like I said, we'll anticipate on having another meeting at least sometime at the end of January or sometime beginning of February. And then the final public hearing process through the city council would be conducted sometime in that late April, May time frame, so that, like I said, there's enough leeway time for the staff to compile everything and distribute that to the Department of Commerce for the final review and approval. So kind of the roles of the stakeholder committee, just really quickly, these were the number of items in the HB 1923 guidelines that were required for any of the grant recipients. And you'll see in the red circle there, I've highlighted the one that specifically applies to you and the public, which is provide participation and input from community members, community groups, local builders, realtors, nonprofit housing advocates, or local religious groups. And so not only in this particular project, which, you know, our goal is to get a variety of folks that represent a broad cross-section of the community, the city will also be reaching out or asking for input from these other groups as well, because this topic is wide-ranging and affects many groups, no matter whether you work for or are in some way affected by housing in some capacity. So I think it's fair to say that probably most human beings have some kind of effect to housing, because we just there's just a lot of challenges, especially in our region and over the last few years, that the state recognized that something had to be done. And so the communities, especially, were fortunate enough to be the recipients of some grant dollars to help find some ways to help address this challenge. So, like I said, I've already mentioned this, is a cross-section of the community, identifying challenges and barriers to providing affordable mix of housing types, and then that will help us understand your local context as it relates to the city of Monroe. Each community has their own unique aspects and challenges, and so we're going to want to find out from you all on what you think those are, because, you know, as the experts, we kind of do this on a daily basis, but we really want to know from all folks and all cross sections on what it is that you individually are challenged with, or think that the city should be addressing to help some of these issues. And then assisting the project team in considering various approaches and recommendations, and then finally reviewing and providing comments on the draft HNA and HAP, which will be forthcoming. So just to kind of go over the housing action plan and the assessment in brief here. So again, there's this housing needs assessment, which is this data finding process. There's the action plan, which are kind of your guiding principles or actions for trying to find solutions for housing, and then the key findings and recommendations. I've kind of briefly talked about this, but in a nutshell, you know, what is a housing needs assessment? It's basically under the GMA. It's an inventory of existing and projected housing needs, and should inform the housing element of a city comp plan. So like I said earlier, it's not only going to be informing this process or this particular project, but also as the city embarks on the next major comprehensive plan update, that will probably begin in earnest. Most cities will, if the deadline is 24, 25, I would expect most of them will probably start in 22 to start reaching out or working on that next update. And then this shows that wheel again that I showed earlier. So the data requirements, there's many requirements, and some of them are optional, but the Commerce Department has identified a number of required ones. But in general, they fall into 3 categories, and that being the community profile, the workforce profile, and the housing inventory. And these particular data sets will then feed into focus areas, which are the gap analysis and land capacity analysis. And the gap analysis really is, where are those gaps in the kind of overall policy of the city that they need to help develop or address in future housing decisions that are made. And then the land capacity analysis is really looking at sort of like that buildable lands segment that I talked about earlier in that flow chart. That really talks about what land is available within either the current city limits of Monroe or what's called the urban growth area, the UGA. Where can the city help or identify areas that will be utilized for that future growth capacity? So kind of digging into a little bit of the data that we found, and this is really just a really brief snapshot. And if you want to dig in more, the housing needs assessment, Anita can provide you that link at the conclusion of the meeting so that you all can, at your leisure, review and then, of course, provide comments to all of us. The community profile describes, I put Oak Harbor because we're working with Oak Harbor, I apologize, but Monroe emphasizes characters of current future housing needs, population by housing group, cost burden households, and then household size. So you'll see on the graph there on the right side there, you'll see the distribution of the population in this pyramid. And you may have seen these kind of before as part of like census data and whatnot.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Does this include the prison population as I look at the age 30 to 34 and the large male population size?
Yeah, so this is from the 2018 data set.
But it includes the prison population?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a population that's identified within the city limits of Monroe, so they probably meet their housing needs. Yeah, from the ACS, which is directly from the census data, and the census takes data from them as well. Mm-hmm.
I have a question as well. Yeah. So that looks like it's from 2018. Do you expect a big jump when we get the 2020 census results?
It's possible. I mean, I was looking at the other data sets. There's been some steady increases. I would expect that Anita and Ben particularly can probably address, the permitting situation or what they've experienced over the course of the last 2 years, and what population bump has occurred between now and then. I don't know if you have any feedback, Ben or Anita, on kind of that gap time between 18 and 20, or what you might anticipate.
Yeah,
So I know,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so you did use some of the information from the OFM website, because I know the last time I checked, that was pretty accurate as far as when we report every year our issuance of building permits. Okay, so it should be fairly accurate. I mean, I know we're just going through the 2020 census at this point, and unfortunately, we did ask the question if we were going to be able to coordinate this with that census, but unfortunately, because of Corona and everything, and just because when this is actually due, we weren't able to line that. But yeah, we're coming as close as we can.
Yeah, and just to follow up on the growth, we will continue to see the steady growth. What happens in Monroe and in most areas in Washington, specifically Western Washington, as we go through these massive ebbs and flows with these boom bust cycles that we've been on. And so, particularly during the the Great Recession time, you saw this massive downturn in housing. Thus, our population slowed way down. And so you were left with a lot of vacant land, and then when things rose up, you had this massive boom of population increase, and we're on probably the backside of that hill right now with that increase for this cycle. And so you'll continue to see that that go up. You're talking about right around maybe a 2% growth per year, and so that's what we've been tracking lately.
And then another factor too that plays a role on any given, 2 to 5 year cycle. It really depends too on if and when a community considers growth or additional growth, either through annexations or taking on additional lands on the urban growth area that's allocated to a particular community. So I know. Just working with Ben and his staff, the city has been considering on annexing additional lands to the north, and so that also will play an effect on the population because you're taking in those individuals that are currently in the county and then will be a part of the city of Monroe. So for the most part, Ben's correct in that there's been some little bit of slowing over the last couple of years or so, and I'd say working with other jurisdictions in Puget Sound over my career over the last 20 years, most of them are in that 2, 3 to 4%, but some of them may have a huge jump because they've annexed land or have seen a huge development happen or something like that. I think City of Lake Stevens or Marysville or those that are in that North Sound or North King or Snohomish County, they've experienced a lot. And so Monroe, not so much, but, depending on the policy direction of the city council and, planning commission, that those population numbers can change. So moving on to the next one, the workforce profile. So this is just a brief category on, what employment trends, commuter workforce or jobs by earning. So Monroe has, the biggest piece there is employed in Monroe but living outside of the community. So that means that they, work in the city, but they don't live within the city limits. And then alternatively, living in Monroe but employed outside. So that's just right under that other one. And then others are employed and living in Monroe. And then this housing inventory, this shows, and again, excuse Oak Harbor, but these are Monroe data, that the housing tenure, renter occupied and owner occupied. So this shows the percentage of the housing folks that are within renters in that, in that time frame of 2011, and then how that's jumped up to 37%, and then owner occupied from 2011 to the 2018 time frame. And then the one on the right shows the gross rent rates from 2018. The kind of sweet spot, or the number that happens the most, is that 1,000 to 1,499 range. And you'll probably know or seen from other data that's obtained from other communities, or sometimes you'll get some stuff from Windermere or others that are speaking on local radio shows or TV or in the Herald. They'll have a story about how rent rates have changed or housing prices. And Monroe, because they're further out of the main urban core, the rates of rents tend to be just slightly lower than some of the other inner suburbs, say like Boston Bothell or Woodinville, or even more so Kirkland, which is, Kirkland and Bellevue are just through the roof. So, Monroe happens to be on that kind of little bit more affordable ring of Puget Sound region, but it's been incrementally increasing as time has gone on for certain. So again, I won't belabor this too much because I've talked about it quite a bit, but again, the housing action plan process, where the goal of it is to really develop clear and actionable strategies that meet the current and projected housing needs for the city of Monroe. And the state law requires that it's to identify strategies to encourage the construction of additional affordable and market rate housing types at prices that are accessible to a greater variety of incomes. That's the overarching goal. And then it will outline how the city of Monroe will respond to the community's unique housing needs. And then finally, be a comprehensive tool that helps the city implement housing policies, programs, and strategies. So this will be the next phase of the project as we kind of digest and disseminate the housing needs assessment. Anita will be taking the lead on this next project, and we'll be advising her on, developing the, the strategies that will be presented to the city council in this project. And lastly, the overarching goals: assess the housing needs, comprehensive public engagement process, and then prepare an HAP that's consistent with the housing elements of the city's comp plan and addresses the goals and policies. And then objectives, increasing the supply and types of housing needed in Monroe, looking at the developing zoning, regulatory, and incentive strategies to support the housing that needs Monroe. That's a really big one because, currently the city may have certain policies or zoning that has met the needs over the last course of that comprehensive plan update. But when we do the findings of this particular project, there may be some new things that are discovered, and there'll need to be some changes made to those existing plans or the zoning or land use designations. Evaluating existing, like I said, housing policies and actions, develop recommendations for improvement on housing needs assessment data and those findings, identify schedule of programs and actions to implement the HAP, and then lastly, create a process that is inclusive and focused on housing solutions. And I think I've talked about this one. Data gathered will help identify community housing needs, collaborative efforts and partnerships with regional housing providers. So that's a really important one because there's lots of agencies. Tony, you're involved in the Housing Hope. Other agencies like the YMCA or the YWCA, particularly with women's housing, they're very active in lots of communities throughout Puget Sound and possibly in Monroe. So there's these groups that will really want to find out from them, as well as how that plays a role in the policy decisions that are made. And then help inform and support the decision makers, who ultimately are the city council, to address these housing challenges in Monroe. So here's a snapshot. Whoa, I think I hit it fast. Here we go. Here's a snapshot of our project page, one screenshot anyway. And this is basically kind of an overall summary of the project. So you'll have some links on there that has the project background, the timeline that I showed you earlier. It'll have some other associated documents like the comp plan, the housing element of Monroe, and some other things. And then the most recent addition is the housing needs assessment, which is on that project documents tab at the top there. Anita or Ben can provide that information to you when we're all finished. Obviously, public participation is at the forefront of this project, and in normal times, we would have these face-to-face meetings because that's kind of, you know, human nature, and we all like to meet in person, but obviously COVID had other ideas this year, so that has reduced our face-to-face timing, and so we're doing a lot of these are pretty much all of them through electronic means, you know, the Zoom or GoToMeetings, which have proven effective for all the folks that we've been helping so far. And so hopefully you're still able to provide the city valuable feedback, and I know that will be the case, to help them and, you know, inform them and move forward with a good product. So we've developed this project page. We'll have periodic online meetings, whether that's from you or the city may choose to have an additional open house public meeting. There'll be public noticing either on this page or on the city's main web page. There is an affordable housing page or the community development page that will have information as well. And then emails or mailing lists or surveys are also an option. There is a survey, before I forget, there is a survey that was just created, and that is also on the web page at the bottom of this. So if you see where project timeline is, think there's a couple more boxes below, and you'll see a link to the survey. And we'll be looking forward to any comments that you might want to provide too. So next steps in the process is to complete the housing action plan. Since we've completed this housing needs assessment, we'll review the draft in the spring with the SAC, and then we'll continue to have ongoing public outreach through all the different means that I mentioned earlier. And then the bottom kind of just shows that process. So developing the approach and the methods, assessing and identifying these unmet housing needs. We'll learn the community needs through public engagement, and then policy analysis or recommendations for that final housing action plan. So lastly, just wanted to, before we go on to the group discussion, here's Anita's information. You probably already have it through an email that you received, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach Anita at any time. I'm kind of a conduit in between the city and you all, so anything that she communicates or you communicate to her, we'll collaborate and get that addressed in the future documents that we put together, and anything you have provide, whether verbally or electronically, will be taken down and considered, because like I said, we're really excited and fortunate to have all of you participate in this process. So this is going to be a really big deal for the city as they move forward on the project. So with that, I'll kind of leave it up for any general questions before we take a quick break, and then we'll do the group discussion, which we have a number of more specific focus areas that Anita and I put together. But just wanted to leave it open for either Anita or Ben or any of you all to you know, have general questions.
Not at this time.
Anita or Ben, did you want to make any closing comments before we take a quick 10-minute break, a stretch break for everybody? I know that was a lot of information to digest, so if you have any questions, you know, feel free to ask me now or later. I'm totally open.
Just that I will send you that link. I'm sorry I didn't send it earlier, but yeah, it's a really good platform for you and for the community to provide comments, and then there's a survey out there as well. So I'll make sure I get that to you.
And Anita, I went ahead and sent it out to service providers and community human services, service advisory board and HVAC people. So you should be getting some great feedback from the nonprofit. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh, there were some questions about population growth, and so a great resource for the public that I always go to is the Office of Financial Management, and they track population growth throughout Washington State and all kinds of other good statistics. So if you're ever curious just about any topics around those areas, I highly recommend it. They usually do it in a pretty user-friendly format and have just great data available for the public.
Good point. Okay. Well, if nobody has any further general comments or questions, we'll take a quick 10-minute break or so. So it looks like it's 4:05 right now, so we'll meet quarter after, and we'll see you all back here. So you can feel free to turn off your screens, and I'll leave this active, and we'll meet back at 4:15.
Hey Todd, you're on mute.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So for the second half of the meeting here, we have four questions for you all, and we can take about 15, 20 minutes or so. I know the meeting block said till 6 p.m., but we don't have any intention to keep you here till then. So there's nothing to worry about there. And we'll kind of go through these as you know, conversations go through, and if any of you have to leave early, by all means, you know, we totally understand. So again, we're just really appreciative of your time. So the first one is, what are the top housing issues in Monroe? And this can be regarding affordability, types, sizes, or other factors that we haven't identified on the screen. So we'd like to kind of hear from everybody on what you perceive or what you think are some of those housing issues, whether it be kind of a personal thing or it may be just you know, something that the city should probably think about. So if anybody would like to kick off the discussion, or Anita, if you have any initial feedback.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to say that I would love to hear from everyone today, but I don't really want to put anyone on the spot. So, you know, feel free to talk today, or if you'd like to provide your comments in an email to me later, that's fine too. And there doesn't seem to be a raise hand function. So if everybody just wanted to, if everybody just wanted to physically raise your hand, then that'd be great.
Okay. So I have some comments. As far as the top issues, what I see when I look around is, well, I mean, affordability. I think that of course, you know, it's just the market fluctuation and stuff. So I think someone mentioned, I think it might have been, I forget his name, mentioned concerned about like future generations being able to afford and live the same way that, you know, that we live. I mean, everybody always, you know, the next generation should be doing better. It's, you know, that's the kind of the thinking that we have. But my concern is, how does the next generation do better when, you know, someone coming out of college, now the average house for them is going to be $500,000-$600,000 or more. Also, the types of homes, I've noticed that in the last couple of years, I mean, there's all these, you know, cookie cutter communities coming up, so to speak, and the houses are very large. Not everybody has a need for, you know, 4,000, 3,000 square feet. There's no, I think personally is, I live in a 2-story home right now, and I have bad knees and I'm getting older, and I think to myself, like, I really love to go into, we used to have a rancher and I'd love to go back to a ranch, and it's like, you don't really see a lot of those around at all. And you know, that's just some of the things that I see. Also, I think there's only like one, like over 55 community, not that I want to live in one, but you know, but you go to someplace else, like in Florida or something, there's a ton of those like over 55 communities. Like we don't have a lot of those here that attract people, I guess. And you know, another thing I noticed is, if you go to like Redmond or other places, you see a lot of apartment housing. In Monroe, I haven't noticed a lot of apartment housing. Like there's like maybe 1 or 2 apartment housing developments. And that's it for me.
Okay, thank you.
Anita, I'd like to follow.
Oh, go ahead. Yes, sorry. Go ahead, Jay.
So I'd like to follow Petra, because I have a similar issue, because I've been kind of poring over the multifamily, the apartment data for Monroe in particular. And I'm looking at the number of apartment units and the average rent rates. And we've increased the number of apartments from when I've been pulling reports, from 700 units to 1,000 units. And the rent rate has gone up, which is kind of counterintuitive to what I'm used to seeing when you're, talking about financing multifamily. Usually when there's an increase in multifamily units, vacancy rates go up and rent rates either stabilize or go down. But in Monroe, vacancy rate has gone up. Part of that, I just pulled a report today. So report I pulled in July said vacancy was almost 14%. Part of that is increase in units. Part of it could be COVID. There's no way to quantify what COVID has done to multifamily that is just coming on. I know there's a lot of multifamily landlords that aren't getting paid because people cannot afford to pay their rent. But this is different. This is 300 additional units online, and the landlords, the apartment owners, haven't reduced rent rates. I think they're assuming that at some point vacancy rates will go back down to historical levels, because looking at this report from November of 2019, vacancy rate was 3.3% in Monroe for apartments.
Wow.
And so that's a really tight market for apartments. So that's one of the things I'd like to get to the bottom of in Monroe, why an increase in multifamily units there's not a corresponding stabilization of rental rates or a decrease in rental rates.
Okay.
Then Petra mentioned one other thing that I wanted to kind of also, what was the other thing you mentioned, Petra?
It might have been that you mentioned concerns about like your children being able to afford to buy something in Monroe.
Oh, no, yes, that as well. But you also mentioned the over 55 housing.
Oh,
so,
yeah, you said yeah.
When I'm looking at population growth, I think Ben mentioned we're at 2%, and the data according to this report is population growth over 5 years is 7.5% to 8%, which is probably right around in that 2% per year. But population growth for 5 years in Monroe, 55 plus, is over 26%. So, Petra has a very valid point that, with that level of increase of that demographic, that's another thing that we should be looking at, not only affordable, but kind of tailored to somebody who doesn't want a 2 or 3 story residence. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jay. And then I think I saw Rachel.
So yeah, I echo those concerns. I would say that the most recent affordable housing complex that went in is River Run. And the rates of River Run are just like maybe $100 less than the market rate of Morning
Run and the River's Edge. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I had them spliced in my head, but they're just a couple $100 apart. Like, I mean,
really?
maybe $100 apart. There's not that great of a difference between the most available, newest affordable housing complex that we have in Monroe and our current market rate. So what I'm finding is that folks that live on disability and Social Security income can't afford to live anywhere and end up living in their cars. And we're just really looking constantly for that sweet spot between like $700 to $1,000 of rent to get people housed. And that seems to be the gap that's really missing in how people can afford to work and have a single person income and be able to be housed.
And of those numbers, do you find that it's mostly single people or is it families as well?
I would say both, depending on the mix. I would say both. I know like a lot of single people with jobs would fit into that $700 to $1,000 bracket, and I know that couples in the older category who are drawing off of disability and Social Security income, who may have worked all of their lives, are also needing that $700 to $1,000 bracket.
Okay. And then Janelle had a couple questions.
So I don't really have any questions. I just wanted to hit on the apartment aspect and the affordability. I know that when my family moved here back in April of 18, we lived in the Morning Run. And when we moved in, our rent was $1,550 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And then once our year lease was up, if we didn't want to like re-sign our lease, then our rent was going to be $1,850 a month.
Wow.
And for me, like coming from California, the city that I come from, we had a 4-bedroom, 4.5-bath, 3,000 square foot house for $1,800. And it was in like a nice area. Thankfully, we were able to find a house, but we live in a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath house now, and our rent is $2,150, and it's about 1,600 square feet, and we're renting. But I also have a friend of mine who just moved into River Glen, and her rent, she lives in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and her rent is $1,368. So, I mean, I love Monroe and I have no intentions of going anywhere. And it's just a blessing that we found the place that we live in right now. But even before we moved here, we were looking like, because we didn't want to live, we're a family of 10. We didn't want to live in, an apartment, but that's all we could find. I was just finding that there were no places, like there was no affordable places for us to live. And we're not in the position to buy a house. A lot of people are in that position and they own everything, but we're not there, so a lot of people do have to rent. And like both me and my husband, we have good jobs. We both work for the school district. But it's just like, once you get into even moving into a house, like it's first, last deposit. So by the time you're moving in, you're really paying like $6,000 just to get in the house, or just to get in the apartment. At Morning Run, because we had challenges with our credit, we had to pay $3,000 to move in there, like when we moved from California. It's just the affordability factor is like the biggest issue in my opinion. So yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Tony?
Are you finished? Yeah, I just thought I had my 2 cents worth. Affordability is the biggest issue. I have 2 children who both live here in Monroe. They both rent, and I like to keep them out of my house. I don't want them moving back in. Just going on record for that. But what was one of the slides that was interesting is how many people live in Monroe and work other places. And it's been several years since I looked at the statistics. But a lot of them work on the east side. And the old joke was, can't afford to live on the east side, you move to Duval. You can't afford to live in Duval, then you move to Monroe. If you can't afford to move to Monroe, you move to Sultan. And if you can't afford to move to Sultan, live in Duval. You have septic. Community, but we're not isolated. That's and you go look at the North Hill, look across the house. Housing. People would have been buying jobs are now being forced to rent in Monroe because the housing that are being built, they cannot afford. I live in the old part of Monroe. What also amazed me is how often rental units, single-family rental units that were like 800 square feet, built during the 1920s and 30s, single bathroom, some of them not even on foundations, still on the old post and pillar props, that are now owned by homeowners because that's what they could afford. 800 square house with one bathroom, going for $400,000, 2 bedrooms. And so there has been an increase in apartment building units, but I also think there's been some decrease in single family housing being rented. At least that's my observations in the old part of town, looking at many older houses that people bought, invested in, rented for many years, and then with the market going up, decided to cash in the equity that's been accumulated. Sizes, sizes gets into, this is what I can afford for rent. I need 3 bedrooms because I have 2 girls and a boy. And the only thing I could afford for the rent is a 2 bedroom. And so I might give my boy 1 bedroom, my girls the other bedroom, and I sleep on the couch and such. So it's interesting dynamics that have taken place since I've moved here, watching when the Frylands were being built out, they were marketed as a place where working families can buy a house and get settled in. There were new houses that were 1,200, 1,300 square foot ramblers that someone can get, their first home, move into there, build equity, and then move up. You look on the North Hill, do you see any houses like that? I don't think I do. You see some getting close to that in the old, in the south of Highway 2. There are still a couple small developments like on Hill Street where the new houses are bargains at 400, 500, actually I think they're 500,000 now. And they're considered bargains compared to the north part of town. The other question, we talk about apartments, is there are large areas of the city that is zoned for apartments that have been historically single-family housing. How much undeveloped land is available that is zoned for apartments, for multifamily? It was mentioned earlier that the city's annexing some undeveloped land, and there's a bit of land still within the city boundaries, but how much of that is zoned multifamily? And as we do this, we talk about the comprehensive plan, we need to think years down the line. And we have to make sure that there's enough vacant land for someone who wants to build an apartment to be able to do it. Because when there's a 3% vacancy rate, there's no incentive, there's every incentive for a landlord to increase his rents. This is America, whether we like it or not, it's a capitalist place, and it's supply and demand determines price. And right now, the demand is tremendous. Nothing unique to Monroe. And it's a challenge for a small community like Monroe to meet those challenges. But collectively, every community has to figure out how they could add their little piece to solving the problem. Anyway, Jay, I find those statistics you shared concerning.
Yeah, Tony, I just wanted to clarify that today's report, 1,009 apartment units, 10.7% vacancy.
Thank you. But
the very low vacancy rate that I quoted, that was back before the additional, that was back when there was 700 units.
I appreciate that.
But
and
what I was trying to convey is that rental rates have not gone down. So when vacancy rate was 3.3%, average apartment unit was 1,318. That includes studio through 3-bedroom, 1,318. And today it's at 1,320.
I appreciate the clarification. So what is the ideal vacancy rate to reach at least an equilibrium, in your opinion, or do you know?
So typically in lending, you pencil in a 5% vacancy rate, which is typically where a landlord can make money on his property and rents are stable enough for tenants to be able to afford them and not worry about getting priced out, or as Janelle mentioned, have the rent is jacked up on you like that. You need a certain level of vacancy so that landlords don't feel like they can just keep raising the price on tenants and making them have no choice at all.
Right. That the rent increases just reflect inflation, ideally.
Yes. Well, it would be ideal if rent increases matched wage increases, right? That would be, but what actually ends up happening is rent increases match property value increases. So the market price per unit is $185,000, and so if real estate investors going to buy that unit, they're going to kind of match it up with market value, how much they've had to borrow to finance it, and what they can afford to rent it for. Sometimes in the single family market, like Janelle was mentioning, if somebody has and you mentioned too, Tony, if somebody has had their property for a long time, they're just looking for a good quality tenant. They're not looking to maximize their rent rate. They're looking for a good quality tenant that will be there for a long time. And so they're able to rent at, lower values than they would typically rent at, which, if somebody comes in and buys a large or develops a large multifamily, it's going to be a market rate unless they can get some sort of concessions on the value of the land or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Jay, you made a good point about how we've increased apartment units in the city, but the rent rates have gone or haven't gone down. So I think that's very important because that's what I was assuming too, that, supply and demand. So, and there have been a lot of developments lately. So that's concerning.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I have a
Jay,
question.
if I can ask a question.
Oh.
Peter,
I'm
you
sorry.
mind if I, just a quick question?
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
go ahead.
The vacancy rate of 10%, could that reflect just the new apartments taking time to fill up?
The absorption, yes. Part of it's absorption, but there's no way to quantify because this service provider, there's no way for them to quantify what part of the vacancy is COVID related and what part is just absorption rate. So I don't know. Based on the fact that apartment, rates haven't gone down, the rental rates haven't gone down, I have a feeling that the apartment owners think that it's COVID related, the vacancy. It's either, the lease rates are going to increase so that they're not as vacant at some point, and there's no point. They don't want to decrease rent rates because they don't have to.
And thank you for letting me get that question.
Okay. Go ahead, Janelle. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Petra. Sorry.
I had a quick question. Tony referred to the North Hill. I'm not really familiar with where the North Hill is, and I know the Frylands, and I don't know if there's any other community names in that I'm not aware of. So I was just curious about that.
North Hill is north of Highway. Late 1990s and early 2000s when they used to do stuff there, referred to it.
Okay.
City.
Okay. Thank you for everyone's comments. Do you think we're ready to move on to the next discussion item?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, let me get my back up here. Okay, so the next one we'd like to hear from you about is, and I heard a little bit about this, but what do you see as the most unmet housing needs? This could be vulnerable populations, senior housing, which I know some of you have mentioned that, or young families, or there could be others. So we'd like to hear from you on this specific topic.
Rachel, do you want to just touch on maybe the vulnerable populations, just because you've been working with the homeless committee?
Yeah, sure. I would say that is an unmet housing need just due to the lack of availability of that 700 to 1,000 range. Sometimes even, I know for one specific couple that I was working with, and they were both elderly on either Social Security or disability, they would only have been able to afford 500. They had a service animal, and that was kind of problematic for them to get from car into housing. And then all that, the first, last, and deposit snowball was also a big challenge for them. So
Okay.
yeah, and I think in the city's plan, I don't think this is anything that the housing action plan can help with, but having some kind of a group home type structure where it's like people can go and kind of rent together, split those costs, is something that we think would help with that while people can't afford rent on their own.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know when we were in the Affordable Housing Committee, we talked about different types of housing. So we talked about micro housing possibly, so geared more towards single people that are working in Monroe. That could be an option. But yeah, definitely those types of housing is what I'm kind of moving towards. Yeah, I really feel like the middle housing component is what we're missing, and we've kind of talked about that already. So, for college students, for young families, and then also for seniors when they're wanting to downsize a little bit. So, yeah.
I would also say that, and I'm not sure that this is another area that the Housing Action Plan could help with, but From a county call yesterday with Executive Summers, we were talking about how, you know, as far as permanent housing goes, we're kind of good right now, and we need to focus some more on transitional housing options for our vulnerable populations.
Okay, thank you.
Anita, I have a question.
Sure.
So is there a system in place that, you know, if you were able to get a grant, let's say, and you could set up an escrow account, let's say a family couldn't afford first, last, and damage deposit, and the grant allowed you to set aside $4,000 or $5,000 in an escrow account that you kind of accounted for, rather than giving it to Morning Run on behalf of the renter. If you got the grant money, kept it in a escrow account, and then, you know, let Morning Run know you have that available should anything happen. You know, you could disperse the dollars, but then the renter wouldn't need to come up with a large sum of money to get adequate housing. Is that something that's possible?
So as far as the city doing that program, I think Rachel had a comment on that.
The city does have HB 1406 money coming in. The first allotment was something like $27. It was really disappointing. The second was more what we're hoping for. The first allotment, it's based off of sales tax, so the first allotment was very COVID impacted, and the second allotment was more what we're expecting to find, which is more like $4,000. And we are looking for some way to manage the program of providing that first, last, and deposit to people. And I think we're open to options on how to do that.
Awesome.
Oh, Tony?
Yeah, I think one of the unmet housing needs that's going to be unique this coming year, I don't know if this study will address it or can address it, is right now there's a moratorium on evictions. And many people who are renting for various reasons have not kept up with their rent, knowing that there's a moratorium on eviction. So what happens when that moratorium expires, and there are a many number of people who have not been paying their rent? What will take place? And they don't have the resources to meet paying their rent at that point, or the past rent, more importantly, and such.
Yeah, good point. And I believe, does that end at the end of the year?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's extended to October, I believe, 15th right now,
Okay.
mid-October, and it will probably extend again. I mean, it's got to end at some point, but
Yeah, okay. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, and I kind of addressed some of this question in the last discussion item, but any other comments on this one?
The ones who are vulnerable has to deal with who's paying more than 30% of their income towards their rent. Whether that's, I'm sure you can find it in senior or young families. I think one of the unique things we touched on it before, is for young families, if they want to buy a house in today's market, especially if it's not in Monroe, not in the old part of town, where you're buying an older house that might be, 800 to 1,000 square feet with one bathroom, which I come from a large family, and one bathroom was never a problem. We just negotiated a lot. It's difficult for young families to buy into a house. That's just the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And I think we can go to the next one.
So the third one out of 4 is, what are the perceived housing trends and their potential positive and negative issues?
I just see that like I think Tony was saying that on the North Hill, there are a lot of very big houses being built, very expensive houses being built. And, you know, I mean, we come from an economically diverse community where some people could afford that, but we have to consider building more than that type of housing. You know, that impacts traffic, it impacts everything that, you know, down the line, right? So I just, you know, I just hope that there's more of a balance where we are not just going towards big housing, we're going towards affordable housing, we're going towards housing that's adequate for the elderly, for the vulnerable population, for young families. If we just keep building these mini mansions, that's, you know, we could be in trouble as a city. I mean, I think of when I moved here, like I said, one of the attractions of Monroe was it was much more affordable than, say, Mill Creek or Sammamish, or at the time I mean, now I work from home as everybody does, but I've been working from home for about 2 years. But at that time, my office was in Redmond, and it's, you know, quite a trek to go to Redmond now. And then I have another office in Bothell, and that's still quite a trek. But the wear and tear in my car versus to come to Monroe to have affordable housing back in like 2003 was worth it than getting something in Redmond or Woodinville. Now it's like, it's not so much worth it anymore to, you know what I mean? To have the commute. Now you're going to have a commute and the high price of housing. Before it was a commute and you come home to your house that was affordable.
Yeah. You know, it would be interesting to me, that might become a trend. I'm from the East Coast, Jersey City, New Jersey. Had the rear end view of the Statue of Liberty growing up. In my hometown, you're not allowed to build single family houses. You are allowed to build a duplex. And what that means, like for my niece, when she was young, newly married, had a kid, they were able to buy a duplex. And the reason they could afford to buy a duplex is because the income from the rent from the other unit upstairs. That's how a lot of younger people were able to afford to own their own place. That you bought a duplex and rent it out. She was smart enough to rent it out to my sister, so she had built-in daycare, but that was another story. But that is how young families got into housing. My sister, same sister, she rented for 30 years from the same landlord. It was a duplex. She lived upstairs. Their kids grew up together. They lived there for 30 years. And actually, in 2015, when she was moving, she was paying $800 a month for a 3-bedroom because the landlord didn't need any more. He had paid off his house, and that paid for the taxes. That was the kind of relationship. So I guess as it becomes more difficult for people to buy single-family housing for themselves, would that be the new way of getting into owning your own place?
Go ahead, Rachel.
I would say, you know, perceptions tend to run in extremes on either side of the spectrum. Because some people that I talk to are like, oh my gosh, everything's so expensive, prices keep going up, there's, you know, no affordable housing, what are we gonna do? And some within, I want to say, the last year of Facebook posts that I remember seeing is, why are we building more affordable housing in Monroe? The last thing we need is another affordable housing complex, you know? And so it's like, it really does tend to run in extremes. And I think that, you know, it's worth, you know, educating people on what the spectrum is and what the need is, so that they can really see that this is our community and these are our neighbors that, you know, are struggling.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm like, can I go yet? I'm actually glad you said that, Rachel, because so I work at an elementary school with people who are very established, and it seems like when I first moved here, I was like, oh my gosh, everyone owns a home. Like, I'm so behind. Like, oh my gosh, like we live like because when we moved here, we lived in the apartment. So it was like everyone owns their home. And we want to buy a house, but most of the houses here are like over $600,000, like almost $1 million. Like, I mean, for real, like to fit our family. And it's just like, it is discouraging. But the comment that you said, Rachel, like you do hear a lot of people saying, like, we don't need to build any more apartments. We don't need to build any more affordable housing. Like, but it's always the people who can afford housing that are saying that. And that's the problem. And that's one reason why I really wanted to serve on this committee, because I'm like, hey, I'm not one of those people, I'm not up there. I can't afford $1 million house, but like I can relate to the people who can't, and those are most of the times the people who need the voice, the ones who can't afford it. You know what I'm saying? Like, so, I mean, that's just my little take on it. You do hear that a lot, but we got to make it fair for everybody, because like you said, these are our neighbors. We're all neighbors. We all live in the same community. Whether you can afford $1 million house and I can only afford a $400,000 house, we are neighbors and we live in the same community. And it makes you feel better living in a community knowing that everyone is working for your good, no matter if you're rich or if you're low income. So
I just wanted to make a
saying that.
or a point on what a couple of you said, Rachel and Janelle, is affordable has a different connotation to different people. So you like you said, Janelle, we don't need, what I've heard in my service in other communities from and it just depends on the background of people, is we don't want more of those people or those types of units or whatever the characterization is of that. But the reality is that what we're talking about is middle, just the middle, missing middle is kind of the connotation that Ben and Anita and I hear daily, and maybe Rachel, but we hear that on a pretty regular basis, and that's the working class people that make up probably the majority of the citizens of whether it's Monroe or Linwood or Duval or whatever community you're talking about. Is that's the segment that that's what's really needed in the affordability category. It's not, when people think of affordable housing, they think of the old slums or whatever you're going to call it, and that's old PC stuff, but that's what people think of that, and that's not reality around here. It's just really like, how can you get into a regular house that fits the average working family?
And to go along with what you're saying, there's an element of what I believe they were calling NIMBYism in this topic also, where it's like, yeah, we need that, but not in my backyard. That it's like that can't happen here. So
What's unique about today is that there's always been a lack of affordable housing that for those who are considered low income, those who are making less than 80% of median income. What's unique about today is that there's a lack of affordable housing for those who are making from 80 to 120% of median income. Those who used to be able to buy what used to be called a starter home, that's what's unique today. There's always been a shortage of affordable housing for low-income people. What's unique about today is that there's a shortage of housing for those who are, low and middle income, to say the very least. Anyway, that's my perception.
I think Tony makes a point. There's like, starter homes. There's no starter home communities around here. Anything that would be considered a starter home community. I mean, and that would, be an excellent thing, and to have something here, something that the average person looks at and it's affordable, or even someone that has a bigger house that wants to downsize. There's no downsizing in Monroe. It's like you look at what your house is worth and you're like, okay, I want a smaller house, but it's the same price of what you're going to sell your house for. So it's really downsizing. I've looked at that. It doesn't even really make any sense, because in order to downsize, my mortgage is going to probably double.
And the dynamics of Monroe housing was planned. For those who don't know, I was on city council from January 2000 to December 2011. And I arrived here in August 1st, 1995. But I attended several council meetings, and I heard council members clearly state their intentions was the development going north of Highway 2 would be for the upper income. And that's why you see, many times in planning, you'll see along the main arteries zoning for multifamily, and then from outside the main arteries, streets, you will see the single family housing. And that's why if you look up north of along Chain Lake Road, you'll see all of it's zoned for single family and fairly decent sized lots, because I remember when the Farlands were being developed, and with their 6,000 square foot lots, people thought they were too small. And how could you ever raise a normal family on a lot, 6,000 square feet? So what's exciting is that was intentionally planned. We have an opportunity to intentionally plan a community that meets the needs of a greater number of people and a broader spectrum of incomes.
The one thing, just to a few people's point, and just give you a perspective of what we deal with as land use planners, is the River's Edge apartment, which was a pretty big deal for us as planners. It was our first affordable housing complex. We hadn't had a multifamily housing for quite some time, and so due to the scope and the nature of it, it has to go through what's called a conditional use permit, which requires a hearing in front of a hearing examiner. They kind of act as a judge, and they go through and make sure that you're meeting all of your benchmarks that the laws require, essentially. And we had two gentlemen come in to the meeting and testified that they didn't want the increase in crime, and they already have enough issues with crime because in their area. And so it's really difficult from our level as planners to kind of beat back those negative stereotypes. And then to Tony's point, all this stuff is planned out based on the information and feedback we receive from the citizens and ultimately approved by councils. This council, I don't want to put it on this council, it's a very, very pro multifamily council. They want solutions to our housing crisis. But historically, and I worked back here even before and worked with Tony when he was on council. We ran into challenges when we would go through and as Todd went through, earlier in the presentation about the comp plan process, and we're doing this big picture of what do we want the city to look like, and multifamily just really wasn't on the radar. It was consolidated down to an area. As Tony talked about the North Hill, that area north of Highway 2, it was envisioned as the kind of the nicer, the larger single family homes. So in part of as a community, we've done this to ourselves quite a bit. As far as not planning for these things coming up in the future, and it's kind of a funny mentality that we have as far as if we don't allow it, it won't happen. The reality is growth is going to come whether you like it or not. Harvard just finished a 5-year study in 2016, and it shows our internal migration as U.S. citizens going to Florida, Texas, and Washington in that order. And so we're third in the nation for this internal migration of people coming to our area, and it's only going to the problem's only going to increase with the population coming here. And then just an earlier point that someone brought up, I don't remember who, as far as just the size of the houses and the and you don't see ramblers anymore. Unfortunately, the way the building industry used to work is you used to have your local builder, and they were usually from the area. They maybe if they were from Monroe, they may be built in Snohomish, Lake Stevens, maybe down Duval, and that was kind of their area they stayed in. And so you had a variety of housing types. They built to the needs of their customers or areas around. They had unique individual homes. Well, these we call them nationwides now. You get these companies that slowly started consolidating and developing these nationwide platforms. D.R. Horton, Pulte are just a few of them. And what it is they're these massive conglomerates. I mean, huge billion-dollar industries. They have their headquarters in Texas, and they go through and they gobble up these small little builders, establish a foothold in the state, and start developing. And they have their marching orders from wherever it is. One, offices in Texas, the others are on the East Coast, and they have their marching orders to essentially maximize the profits. Not, with these local builders, they used to be members of the community. It would impact them. They were the ones that were sponsoring the Little League teams, those kind of things. With this, you kind of have now they have no dog in the fight in the local community, as far as, seeing the best thing happening to it. And so they go and they get their chunk of land for that one flat cost. If they build a rambler on it, they're not maximizing their profits. And so that's why they go up, and that's why you see them maximizing out their footprint. Granted, it is additional money to build that additional square footage, but they've already paid for that land. That land's static. And so they're maximizing that footprint in order to maximize their profit. And we only have one builder, probably one of our last local builders, that built ramblers. And when you ask him why he was building ramblers, he goes, because I need to compete with the big companies, and this is how I differentiate myself. And so that whole job sector, or that mentality of builders that had been around for years and years and years, slowly started fading in the 80s, got all but wiped out during the recession. And then you see these massive corporations comes up. So we don't have that, even that kind of that local interest or compassion for their residents. I mean, these builders, it was their neighbors, that they were building for. And now it's profit margin. So that's just from a local level. Those are the constraints that we deal with when we're going through and developing out code. I mean, obviously, as staff, we reflect what the public wants, and that ultimately comes through, who you elect that makes that final decision. But even with, making the lot sizes smaller, they just build the house bigger, and so it's a difficult challenge on our end.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Ben. Yeah, I just want to say that, for me, importance of this housing action plan is to create those strategies. So hopefully we can take those to council and we can codify them at some point, because that's the only way things are going to change.
And as we do that, we also have to realize that we have to deal with the larger trends in our community. There are no longer any small buyers, and whoever's going to buy it is going to figure out how to maximize profit. And it's a lot easier to make a profit on a larger house. I remember Kurt Carr, who was the president of the Master Builders in Pierce County, who built medium-sized houses. He taught me that lesson quite early when we sat on a board together. And he said, you build a small house or a big house, and you put 10% aside for problems that you run into in development. Well, if it's a $200,000 house, you have $20,000 set on the side. If it's, a $500,000 house, you have $50,000. This one is easy to spend money on and still make a profit. It's when you have the $50,000 for your problems. The other trend that I was reading recently is Wall Street has decided to get into rental business because it's a lot easier to evict someone from a rental unit than foreclose on a house. And just as we many times find large corporates to be callous towards individuals, you're going to find the same trends in the rental. And the reason they got into rentals was because it's a lot easier to evict people from a rental unit than it is to foreclose on a house. And so that's going to be a future trend.
And that's a good point, Tony. If I could just add on to that, that's another thing we've really seen is the nationalizing of the rental market unit. If you remember, or the public storage units, the orange units, owner of that sold just before the recession, and made tons and tons of money on it, and turned around and reinvested all that money into buying rental homes. And so you go through, and these markets you're starting to see. It's no longer, this was my second house, I moved on, and now I'm just an individual renting these homes. These rental units are now being corporatized. In Becky Hassard, I know at least a few of you know Becky. Her house that she rents right now isn't owned by a mom and pop. It's owned by a large national chain. And so that's another, as far as controlling price, and as Tony said, taking advantages of those deficiencies in the law to, capitalize on someone else's misery, I guess, is for lack of a better word. All things we're seeing, it's a difficult animal to tackle.
Okay, and then so we have one last discussion question.
Yeah, so this kind of leads into the putting on your future goggles, if you will, and kind of looking down the road 20 years. And when you visualize Monroe down in that 20-year time longer, what would you describe as a successful outcome related to housing?
Besides my kids not living here?
I can put that down, but.
Well, I can say that I've been here almost 20 years, and I mean, I'm going to put my backwards goggles on, so to speak. I see the difference in 20 years is when I first moved here, and I would tell people I lived in Monroe, they would, pull a face. Like,
Yeah.
oh, it was, I mean, really, people would just like really pull a face. And now it's like people are like, oh, Monroe, I was just out there visiting my friend. I was just out there doing such and such, or going to stuff. So we're more on the map, I guess, as far as like people living here, people knowing other people that live here. You see, one of the things you notice is that Microsoft bus that picks up all their employees and they bring them down to, I don't know how active that is right now with COVID, but we are kind of a bedroom community. I wasn't surprised to see the amount of people that work outside of Monroe that, actually live in Monroe. And I just foresee that it's going to keep growing in that direction, that we are going to become more of a destination. But going back, my reasons for moving to Monroe, my husband and I, is because it was deemed affordable compared to other places. I don't know if it's still going to be deemed as affordable. Like someone said, if you can't afford Monroe, you go to Sultan and you go to Gold Bar. So Monroe might not be that place anymore. It might be Index in 20 years that has the reputation of I live in Index because it's affordable. So I mean, it'd be great if Monroe was still considered someplace that was, that suited the, the diversity of economics and, people and situations, because it is a great community. So I hope it does support affordable housing, and people, if they want to spend $1 million in a house, we're still going to have those houses out there. But people that are affordable, people that, the kids that are now like 20 and 21 and even 12 and 13, hopefully they're living here and they decide to stay here and make this their home as well, because it does seem to be affordable.
One thing I would like to see in the future is land in the north of Highway 2, some of the land being zoned for multifamily. The old part of town pretty much is all zoned for multifamily. One of the negatives of that is that it's presently older single-family housing that is probably the most accessible for new families to get into home ownership. And I always say that land use decisions, when the decision is made, it's revolutionary, but implementing it is evolutionary. And so even not many people realize that the old part of town is pretty much all zoned for multifamily, and that all those single families housing that exist presently, as they wear out and get torn down, will be replaced by apartments. And the question, and I don't know the answer, is whether or not, if as Jay, I don't know if it was Jay, has it been suggested that no one's building single family housing, that young families can get into the home ownership market. If no one's doing that, the only place left is what exists in the old part of town, where the houses, because of their age, are less attractive, and because they only have one bathroom or they only have 2 bedrooms compared to the newer houses, and people have those houses more accessible to people entering the home ownership market, is I guess what I'm suggesting. And if it's known for multifamily and no industry, no developers getting into building more affordable opportunities for home ownership, that might be something that, anyway, that's a question, whether or not that's the ideal. And yet, I understand it. I understand density. I grew up in the 6th most densely populated county in the United States. The house I grew up on was on a 12.5-foot lot. So I understand it. And that's why I think it's also important to, in one sense, to preserve the single family housing in the old part of town as a way for young families to enter the home ownership market. I also realize that we need more land zone for multifamily to be developed. So many policies, there's tension between 2 of them. And we have to figure out how you implement that policy with that tension.
Thank you. Rachel?
So let's see, I actually wanted to share something from the TAC, and I'll start with a little context. So in 2019, Mayor Jeffrey Thomas put together what is known as the HPAC, or Homeless Policy Advisory Committee. And that committee was tasked with putting together a set of non-binding recommendations to go to council to address Monroe's homeless crisis. And in February of 2020, council and the mayor approved those recommendations. And since then, Ms. Knight and I have been working with the team of technical experts to go about implementing them. Some of the technical experts that we've been working with have been from Volunteers of America, St. Vincent de Paul, Cascade Church, the Snohomish County Executive Office, Housing Hope, Evergreen Health Social Services, Community Foundation of Snohomish County, Take the Next Step, Monroe School District, St. Vincent, oh, I said St. Vincent de Paul. But in that process, we hired a facilitator because we were just kind of having a hard time bringing all these great minds and service providers and technical experts together to be on the same track. And the facilitator helped us walk through our mission, vision, and values. And I wanted to share the vision statement and mission statement of the TAC, because I think it relates to what we're talking to here. So I'll go ahead and do that. So the vision statement was, the Monroe and Sky Valley communities will be thriving for all ages, achieving a better future for generations to come. We will be a top location for businesses that want to set up shop, families want to move here, and retirees. We are working toward reducing the impacts of homelessness on our community while not adversely impacting current or future homeless individuals or families. For those that find themselves struggling and on the streets, they will have hope here in Monroe, where there is help to get back on track and to achieve stability and self-sufficiency. And the mission statement of the TAC was, TAC's mission is to create a safe community where homeless individuals and families find access to meaningful, and this is important, realistic available services, shelter, and housing, where families who struggle to make ends meet can find affordable housing, help meeting their basic needs. Serving all citizens of Monroe, TAC members are service providers and city leaders who have committed to a long-term endeavor of listening, learning, collaborating, and resourcing mutually to achieve this mission.
Thank you. Any other last comments on this question? Okay.
Well, that concludes the formal agenda this evening. So I'll leave up to Ben or Anita to close us out, or if anybody else wants to provide any additional last comments, and then I'll let Anita or Ben kind of talk about the next steps that the city is going to proceed with on this project.
Well, I just, first of all, wanted to thank everyone for joining this committee and volunteering your time. I really appreciate it. So I would just ask that, so as I send you the link to the Monroe platform page, that if you could just share that with, you know, other people that you know that would be interested in doing the survey and making comments on the housing needs assessment, that would be great. So the next steps in this process is just to do a lot more community engagement, community outreach. So, you know, I'm used to doing community outreach in person. So going to, you know, like National Night Out or YMCA or the library or farmers market, things like that. So I'm kind of bummed out that I won't be able to do that, but I'm going to try to find other ways that I can reach people in the community. So definitely, if you have any suggestions on how I can do that, I would appreciate it. And I don't know if Ben had any other closing comments or not. But.
No, I didn't. No, but definitely thank you. I appreciate everyone's time so much. Thank you.
Yeah, and likewise here, we really appreciate all your input and feedback, and Anita and I will be compiling notes together over the next couple of days. Sammy's been taking notes as well, and then we'll distribute those within the week. And then, like Anita mentioned, we'll definitely appreciate any comments that you have with regards to the housing needs assessment or any other materials that are on the project page. And then we look forward to having you again at an upcoming meeting. It'll likely be after the New Year's is when we'll be meeting again. In the interim, Anita and I will be working together on the housing action plan, and then we'll discuss that particular document as we come along.
And I did enjoy meeting all these new people. I hope I run into you in the store someplace and to get to meet you in person. It's been a pleasure and an impressive group of people. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again. You guys all have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.